This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is Hot Hero Sandwich. It was a late 1970s show on Saturday afternoons, and I have one of its stars. We'll talk about it. Nan-Lynn Nelson is my guest. She's an American actress, and she was one of the people who starred on a late 1970s young adult, teenage show that ran in the middle of well, I guess it would be after the Saturday morning cartoons of the era. It was a hybrid show. It was part Saturday Night Live, part talk show, part I guess, variety show. And it only ran for about 9 or 10 episodes. So like I usually want to do, welcome Nan. If you could get a little background about who you are first, and then we'll talk about the show.
Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, Dan, thank you so much for the invitation. I am very happy to be here. As you said, I'm an American actress, and I've been in the business of show for over 40 years now, and have really reached just about all of the goals that I wanted: to be on television, to be on Broadway, to be off Broadway, to be in film. And so I feel very blessed to have had the career that I have and continue to have. And I've just grown so much as an artist, and feel like there's a lot more to learn in this field. Yeah.
Well, we'll be talking more about your career because I'm going to be taping 2 shows with you today. One, my Actors on Acting interview show, but that'll come later. The focus will be here on the Hot Hero Sandwich show. So looking it up, it's one of those shows that there's not a lot known about it. A couple of years ago, there was a public television show that I interviewed one of the producers with and actors with called High Feather. It was a public television show. It only ran for 10 episodes. Here, I'm looking on an Aeolus website that has some information about the show. Ran from 79 to early 1980. So there was a husband and wife team, Bruce and Carol Hart, who started the show. If you could give a little background of what your remembrances or knowledge about how the show got started and your involvement with it before we talk about what it actually was.
Okay. Well, I had an agent. I was sent up for the audition. I got the role. It was a lot of, callbacks and waiting. I was actually on Broadway at the time. I believe, it's been almost 40 years. But when I finally got the call that I got the part, I was very excited to meet the cast and everything. And it was sort of a hybrid. It was sort of the teenage takeoff of sort of offspring of Saturday Night Live. We actually recorded it in the same studio that Saturday Night Live recorded. Shared the same dressing rooms. I was in, whose dressing room was I in? Oh, I can't remember. Oh, Newman.
Lorraine Newman?
I was in Lorraine Newman's dressing room. And so, yeah, we used the exact same set and everything. And every week it was a different guest, musical guest. We had interviews. We had celebrity interviews. If you recall, we interviewed Jane Fonda. There were quite a few very high profile.
Richard Pryor.
Yes, yes, yes. So it was a really interesting show, maybe a little ahead of its time. I don't know. I don't know why it didn't get renewed. I think, it won the Emmy for children's daytime programming. Why it didn't get renewed, I don't know. We were young. We were not part of, the background of all of that, but it was fun. And everyone got along really well. I remember Bruce and Carol very well. They were there on the set. They were very friendly, very hands-on, and it was a good time.
Now, was it an NBC produced show? Because it did air on NBC.
Yes, it was an NBC produced show. Yep, at Rockefeller Center. Yep.
But it wasn't live. It wasn't done live in the morning. It was taped, correct?
It was taped.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So now there was a house band, the Hot Hero Band. Tom Cottle, who later got an interview show of his own in the mid '80s, was the person who interviewed a number of the celebrities. But it was also one of those things, if I recall, it focused sometimes on, you know, latchkey kids or alcoholism. It had that social aspect, that it wasn't just entertainment. But you were on the entertainment side of the half.
Right. That's right. Yeah, no, it had a very diverse format and platform. And I remember specifically the interview with Jane Fonda and how she talked about her dad and him never actually saying "I love you" to her.
Huh.
And I remember talking to my mom afterwards because I was like, did my mom ever actually say the words "I love you" to me? And of course, she watched the show, and we had a really wonderful conversation after that show aired that Saturday morning, my mom and I. And she told me, she said, "I love you." I don't know if it was a generational thing that parents just didn't say those words to their children. They were busy working and making ends meet or whatever. But I think it was a show that opened a platform for people to have real conversations with their children.
Um, so the show's opening had the theme song, and it had the cast members, at least I guess you would call it the comedy cast members. Basically, a van would zip by, and the people would jump in. You I guess were the roller girl, the skating girl who just hopped into the van. I think you were rolling with a dog in the opening scene.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I hadn't roller skated in gosh, I don't know how long, but they said, "Can you roller skate?" And I said, "Yes, I can. I can roller skate." I didn't know I was going to be roller skating with a dog pulling me, but that's actually what happened. And I did all my stunts. I jumped into the van. I think there were like a bunch of pillows or something, but I jumped into the van, and it was real. It was a real life situation.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about your side of the show, which were the little sketch comedies. So were the sketches written by any of the actors who appeared? We'll talk about the other actors in a moment, but were they written by any of the other actors, or were you just handed the script and said, "Here's a 7 minute script, and you're playing, the ant or something"?
Right. Yeah. No, we had a writing staff. I recall very well. We had a writing staff, and we were given scripts, I think, at the beginning of the week. We memorized all of the different vignettes that we were in, and just recorded them right there in the studio.
Mm.
So yeah, it was very much that way.
So were they all comic sketches that the house troupe, I guess you would call it, were doing? Were there any other? Did you ever go out and film little segments? Because it's been over 40 years since it aired that I remember. Did you go out and do any segments, or were they all done on the stage in Rockefeller?
Yeah. From what I recall, it was all in the studio with built sets.
Hmm.
A living room set, a school room set, or something like that. I don't recall any live on location except when we filmed the opening of everyone in the van situation.
Uh,
Um, yeah, I think it was all sets built just like Saturday Night Live,
yeah.
just like that format. Yeah.
Now, were you used to doing comedy, or was this just a thing where because as I recall, there was maybe you and I think one other black cast member, a male.
Yeah.
Uh,
Garrett Smithrick, yes.
right. And so, what was it? Was that your natural métier, if you will, or was it new?
It was new to me, as far as I was concerned, as an actor, you just do it all, right? I know some people were more prone to the comedic element, like Denny
Denny Dillon,
Dillon.
yeah.
Yeah. I think she, did stand up, had been doing stand up already. I, think since a sense of humor is key for just anybody. But yeah, I guess I kind of got my comedy chops doing a Hot Hero sandwich, but I wouldn't say I was a comedic actress per se. But you just do it all. When you're an actor, you do it all.
And in those days, so you when you went to try out, was this a kind of show where a lot of the actors from the New York area went down to try out, or was it something that just sort of snuck under the radar?
Oh, no, no, no. It was huge. It was a major, major casting call. And I can't remember who the casting director was. Sorry to say, but no, it was, a packed house. You went in, you waited to go in, you got your call back, you got your third call back, you waited, and then you got the call.
Mhm. So,
Yeah.
so let's talk about some of the other cast members. So you mentioned Jarrett Smith. In looking up the show, I tried looking up some of the cast members. Some of them, I don't know, haven't done anything in years, so I don't know if some of them might have not even still be alive. But um, as best as you can recall, Jarrett Smithwick, do you recall doing any episodes or skits with him?
Yeah. Yeah, I do recall doing some skits with him, and honestly, I have not. I've tried to catch up with Jarrett, and I haven't been for years. He's not on Facebook. I don't know where he is. But yes, I remember doing skits with Jarrett. I remember doing skits with Frankie Faison, who actually played my father. Because we had like two ensembles. We had the teenage ensemble, which we were sort of like the stars of the show,
Uh,
and then we had the co-stars, which played the adults, the parents, the
uh,
teachers, the authority figures. And so Frankie Faison and Sandra McLean always played the parents of either me or Jared, or me and Jared, if we were playing siblings. And oh boy, then I can't remember the other adults, but I know that there were other adults in that ensemble. But sometimes they played adults, sometimes they just played different characters. But it was just a lot of interactive interchange of doing different characters, and it just really just kept you on your toes. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of variety and diversity in the different skits. And like you said, we did tackle some social things. I don't recall exactly all of them,
yeah.
but I just remember that it was a really cool show to be a part of. It was not typical.
I remember there was some skit, and I could be wrong, but I believe there was a skit where the show was dealing with maybe alcoholism or something, or maybe some
Yeah.
kind of addiction. And one of the skits, and looking at the names, it might have been Matt McCoy uh, was in it, and it was something with the parents were sort of like just urging the character to drink until he passed out or vomited or whatnot to try to teach a lesson. So were the skits generally in tune with the theme of the show, or were
Yeah.
they were all?
That's what I recall, and I do recall one about alcohol
Yeah.
and going to this party, and I think it was Denny
Yeah.
Dillon and
Yes. Yes.
Matt McCoy going to this party, and I remember there was like warning about the party and drinking and alcoholism, and I remember the next time we got together, Denny had said she ran into someone who asked her, did she ever go to the party or something? Like, they thought that it
Mm.
was real life. But yeah, I do recall that. And I do recall that the theme of the show, the skits reflected the theme of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I know just from looking up some of the castmates. Danny Dillon was one of the older castmates. She was about almost a decade older than some of the other castmates, and then there was one or two others that were listed as being older. I guess there's the meme of TV shows where you have 25, 30-year-olds playing teenagers, like Beverly Hills
Yeah.
90210 kind of thing. Um, uh, but were the cast members that were the regulars of the younger cast? Were there any? Was it a good working relationship that you had with all of them?
Yeah, it was a good working relationship. I don't recall any conflicts, but you're absolutely right. We were all well into our 20s.
Mm,
I think I might have been married even at that time. But we were all, playing teenagers.
mm.
Uh, we were able to get away with it back then. Um, but yeah, everybody got along really well from what I can recall and were very supportive of each other.
Yeah. I know earlier you had mentioned that it was almost 40 years, but I hate to tell you, it's 43 years.
Oh, stop it. Oh my God. Now I just say over 40. I
Yeah.
just say it. I've been in show business for over 40 years. And
So
that
yeah. So oh, so when you say was this your first like network gig, your first exposure on television, or had you been acting as a child?
Not as a child. Actually, my first network show was the Bloodhound Gang on PBS, and it was almost back to back years. It was the year that I was on Broadway in Runaways that I got the Bloodhound Gang on PBS, which was part of 321 Contact. That was the name of the whole
Yes.
entire show.
Mm.
If you, I don't know if you're familiar with that
Yeah,
show.
it's coming back. Yeah, the late '70s stuff.
Yeah, right. And so 321 Contact had this little film insert called The Bloodhound Gang.
Mm,
And it was actually little mini movies that we did every week
mm,
on science. And so that was my very first broadcast
mm.
show, professional broadcast show. I had done commercials and stuff prior to that. And then that same year, I believe, or the following year, I got Hot Hero Sandwich. And it was right after the second season or the first season of the Bloodhound Gang. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the other cast members. Denny Dillon, we mentioned earlier. So she actually later, I think about 5 or 6 years later, went on to be on Saturday Night Live. Um, and you said she was, I guess, the most inclined towards comedy. Um,
From what I can recall, yeah, because she was very funny just as a person,
uh
she was just funny. She just had that timing. And then it was an older woman too who played our mother. I wish I could remember her name because she was hilarious too.
Let me see
I
if I look up here on IMDb. No, it doesn't. Let's see, all cast and crew here. I do see Frankie Faison. Looks like Barbara Walters was interviewed. Robert Guillaume, Coretta Scott King, Eric Estrada, Pryor, Marlo Thomas, Olivia Newton-John appeared on an episode apparently.
Some big names, huh?
Yeah, Olivia Newton-John actually died earlier this year. I was a bit
Yeah.
surprised. But let's see here. No, it doesn't list. It doesn't list anyone past that. But um, Matt McCoy, I had mentioned. I know in recent years, the last 5 or 6 years, he's been doing a lot of insurance commercials. I've seen him on. What are any memories that you have of him? Because from what I recall, he's been more appearing on dramatic shows. Comedy isn't necessarily what he's most well known for.
Right. The biggest memory I have of Matt McCoy is the nicest guy. Matt was just a really nice, kind person, just really sweet. And just, yeah, I just remember, wow, Matt is so nice, you know. Yeah, that's just the biggest memory I had of him and working with him in a few skits, I think. Just being really sweet. And I remember we had to change sometimes right there on in the studio on the floor. And I remember Matt was changing, and then I had to run into where he was changing, and we were both changing together. And I was like, okay, you have to turn around because I have to get into this costume really fast. And he was like, oh, okay, okay. So I saw Matt in his underwear. I remember that. Putting on my stuff. But it was fun. It was crazy. We were just a bunch of crazy kids.
Another actor listed is Paul O'Keefe, and I myself, I can't necessarily place my, I can't, visualize him. But what of any memories do you have of him?
You know what? I think Paul O'Keefe was the veteran of the whole ensemble because he played Patty Duke's little brother in
Oh,
the
that's
Patty
right.
Duke. So he was that quintessential child actor, and so came with a lot of experience. He was also the van driver, if I recall,
Yeah.
in the opening. Again, nice guy. He seemed very balanced. He didn't seem like, showbiz had, turned him into any kind of a weird, creepy guy. Yeah, very professional.
And like Denny Dillon, he was a few years older than the rest of you, it looked like.
I think so. I think he was, yeah, definitely a little older than me. Probably Jared and I might have been the youngest of the oldest teenagers
Uh-huh.
there. I think, but who knows? It was over 40 years ago.
Now, there's also another actor named Michael Longfield, and there's very little about him online. Was, if I recall, wasn't there uh, a heavy set actor? Was he the heavier actor, or am I mixing things up?
Hmm. I don't recall Heavyset, but I
No.
remember Michael.
Okay.
I remember Michael. He seemed to be the most serious of all of the ensemble cast, from what I recall. I don't know if it's because he played a lot of the serious roles or whatever, but yeah, he seemed to be the more, straight arrow, serious guy.
And it looks like the final cast member. It looks like there was only seven of you,
Mhm.
and the final one was Vicky Dawson, a young blonde
Yeah,
woman.
yeah.
Any memories about her?
Again, just a real sweet girl. I think she was from California, I think.
Yeah.
But just really sweet and, professional, and, we all had a good time. We did a lot of talking and stuff in the makeup room. Um, and then worked together in different skits. I don't know if I actually ever did a skit with her,
Hmm.
but I must have because there was a lot of interacting.
Yeah.
We did, family skits, and then we did a lot of interacting classroom skits, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Well, as I recall, wasn't it a 1 hour show?
it was. Yes, it
And
was.
so I think there was at least two or three skits per episode. Then there'd be an interview. The band would play a couple of songs,
And then
and
we'd have guest musical artists as well.
yeah,
We had Sledge,
yeah.
um, and a few other, high profile bands at the time.
Mhm.
At the end, very much, like the Saturday Night Live, where they had a musical guest on the show every week.
Yeah,
We'd get on stage with them and, sing with them and, wave goodbye
yeah.
to the audience. Yeah, the TV audience.
Before we get on to the show and its 9 or 10 episode arc, it says that the series was directed by someone named Tom Tribovich. Do you recall him and any?
I do. Yep. He was definitely from California. He was like the dad on the set. Really nice guy, very kind of laid back. I remember that there was, we would talk about the skits, right?
Uh,
Like who was going to do what if it wasn't like specifically, to be, a black character. Like, who's going to do this skit? Let's have Nan do this with this person. Let's have, Denny do this with this person. Um, and he was just really very open and fun to work with, and sort of kept that. He sort of set the tone, from what I can recall, to keep it just fun.
Nan, let's talk about the show, and because in looking through online, there's very little about it, but apparently it did get a big buildup. It was supposed to be sort of a NBC was sort of touting it as this new thing for Saturday mornings, because kids nowadays don't realize, but Saturday mornings from the late 40s through the late 90s, with all cartoons, and it was usually the bubble-headed Scooby-Doo, where are you kind of thing, and with the occasional, I guess, issues with the Super Friends dealing with something, but this was different because it was live, and it was skits, comedy, it was interviews and whatnot. So it got this big build-up. Do you remember anything specifically that you were told about that if the show took off? How you had to conduct yourself in public or anything like that? Were you
Hmm.
representing the whole network, in other words?
Yeah, no, I don't recall that. I do know that there was really good buzz about the show because it was so innovative, and it treated kids like people, and not like, empty-headed children. Like I said, we did approach certain social issues. And I think, had it really been able to develop and evolve, it still could be running today, honestly, like Saturday Night Live, um, because of the variety of the program, and the subject matter that we dealt with, and the way in which we dealt with it, with skits, with the interviews. It was really just such a unique show, and I honestly don't know why it did not continue. There were rumblings that, there were contract issues, but, as an actor, we were not privy to, the behind the scenes machinations, and, how the sausage was being made. But it did win an Emmy. So, that says a lot. And, as part of the ensemble, I embrace that. I mean, I don't have an Emmy for it personally, but it would be great to have that. But the show did win the Emmy, um, and it really, if NBC, if people at NBC right now would take a look at Hot Hero Sandwich and what it did for Saturday morning and for children, I think it would be very smart of them to bring that show back exactly the way it was. And especially in this day and time, when there's so much more to talk about, with our now, all of the electronics and the technical stuff, the internet. We didn't even have internet back then, Dan,
Yeah, I
right?
know.
It was like
I'm
nothing.
57, so I'm old enough to remember.
Yeah, so, but even that's why I think, I say it was a little ahead of its time, perhaps.
So did you get any rumblings though about every week did they say, "Oh, we only had a 10.2 Nielsen rating. We're down, half a point from last week," kind of thing. Was that sort of a lifeblood, like when you went in for the next show, that they would say, "Oh, we got to up our game this week," or
No, I don't recall any of that. I mean, not to say that that didn't happen. I don't recall that at all. I just recall that the show was a hit, and the ratings, I think we all thought that the show was doing really well, and it was going to get renewed. I mean, because it was doing so well, being recognized on the street, happened a lot for all of us. So I don't really know what happened, why it didn't get renewed. It would be interesting to find out. And both Bruce and Carol have passed on,
Mm.
and I'm sure quite a few other people who were connected with it, and they would be the ones to have the answers to that.
Yeah, when it ran for 10 episodes, was that like the original contract fulfillment? You would do 10 episodes and then if they would renew it. So, okay, so
That's right. That's what I recall. We signed a contract for 10 episodes. And of course, when you do a TV series, you always hope
yeah.
that you get renewed. And like with the Bloodhound Gang, that ran for, I believe, 3 seasons. It got renewed for 3 seasons.
Mm,
And it was a much smaller show, much smaller budget. But yeah, you always hope that it gets renewed,
mm.
you know. We really thought that it would. As a matter of fact, it did run the same year because I got nominated to be nominated for the Bloodhound Gang the same year that the Emmys got nominated, for I mean the Hot Hero Sandwich got nominated for Emmy. So yeah, it was that same year. 78, 79, somewhere in there.
It said fall of
80.
'79 and it ran till like January of '80. So, um,
Okay.
so it wasn't a mid-season replacement. It was a fall show because I vaguely remember back in those days they would have like the fall previews. Each network, CBS, NBC, ABC would have this this year Richie and Fonzie introduced Laverne and Shirley kind of thing.
Right.
Um,
That's right.
yeah. So, did any of the actors that were interviewed, as far as I recall, your troupe was just your troupe? You didn't like if they were interviewing Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor didn't come on and act with you guys, did he?
No, that was all very separate. We never met any of those interviewees. We just saw the results of the interviews later on. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure if we knew who they were until I saw them Saturday morning, watching the show.
Oh,
Uh, don't recall if they said, "Oh, it's going to be Jane Fonda this week," or whatever. Maybe they did, but we never met any of them in person. Yeah,
so
that
what
was
was the week like? Did you tape on like a Friday night or a Friday evening? And when did you have your sit down read throughs or whatnot?
Yeah, I think we started like on Monday
Uh,
with the scripts, reading through, rehearsing, meeting up with costume
uh,
people, if it was like a specific costume that we needed, hair and makeup, a lot of that kind of, mini pre-production stuff. And then I believed we taped, I think we taped on Fridays, either Thursday or Friday,
uh,
um, for either that Saturday or the following Saturday,
hmm.
if I recall. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you thought that the show's format was fine, and you don't know what did it in. Was there any talk after you got the notice there was cancellation that it might be picked up by one of the other two networks because this was before Fox and the Netlets and before Netflix and whatnot, or maybe even PBS because it would seem that that kind of a show was sort of a natural for PBS. Another show that I remember that maybe you probably don't recall, but in the mid '70s, a show called Big Blue Marble that had children from around the world, and you would write to these kids. So a kid in Lebanon would write to a kid in America, who would write to Britain, who would write to Montevideo in Uruguay or something.
That's right. I do remember that show. I don't know if I ever saw that show.
But it seems to
But
me would have been a better fit in a sense for PBS.
yeah, a Hot Hero Sandwich?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, I definitely think so. It would have been a really good fit for PBS. Why it didn't get picked up by another network, I really don't know.
Uh-huh.
Um, but definitely, and like I said, even today, this show would be a good fit for any of the networks, honestly.
Yeah. Um, so let's talk about the legacy of the show. You certainly have fond memories of it. Like I said, tried to look up and contact Matt McCoy or Smithrick or Denny Dillon, and the other ones, but you were the only one that I was able to get through and actually contact. Um, is is the show sort of one of those shows that are lost? Because a few years ago I mentioned there was this show that was on PBS, that it's one of those shows. It was that I could never remember the name of it, and you tell people, "Do you remember a show like this?" And they'd be like, "I never heard of that show."
Mhm.
If you ever encounter someone who says, "Oh, weren't you on that show?" Is it something that people still remember or come up to you now, all these decades later?
Yeah, people do remember that show. They remember Hot Hero Sandwich. Of course, these people who remember Hot Hero Sandwich, of course, are much older now. um, but yeah, people still come up to me and I mean, it's been a while since that has happened, but for years afterwards, maybe 10, 15 years after the show,
Yeah.
yeah, people would come up and say, "Oh, I remember that show, Hot Hero Sandwich." Um, yeah, so it had great exposure, I mean, national network. There were articles I remember. We were on the cover of, I think, TV Guide,
Mm.
the TV Guide that was in the Sunday paper,
Oh, yeah.
the Daily News. I
Yeah.
believe we were on the cover of that, um, and maybe in the regular TV Guide. Remember, you used to buy TV Guide
Yeah.
in the supermarket. Oh
When it
my
was
God,
the size of a digest.
that's right. I am so dating myself. Oh my goodness.
Well, I'm dating myself with you, so we'll go off into the sunset together.
Okay. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think they did a good amount of marketing for the show. Boy, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in the production office to just kind of hear what was taking place, the conversations that were being had, and why the show ended up not being renewed. I remember years later, I was in a restaurant with my family on the Upper West Side, and there was Bruce and Carol in the
Huh.
restaurant. And I think the waiter came over to me and tapped me on my shoulder and pointed to Bruce and Carol. And it was like, oh my God, it was so nice to see them. And it was just a quick hug and a quick hello. And I believe they were on their way out. Of course, we didn't talk about, what happened, but just that it was nice to see them. And that was, of course, a long time ago.
Now, mentioned earlier that it was an NBC show and a promoter for NBC. And back when there were just three networks, there was a lot of, I guess you would call, network loyalty between the networks and some of the actors. I mean, there was that silly show with Howard Cosell, The Battle of the Network Stars. And I know that oftentimes what would happen is people who are on ABC shows or NBC shows or CBS shows would then guest star on other shows. So if you are a CBS star and Marcus Welby was still on, I think Marcus Welby was CBS, you'd be on, do a guest, more likely to do a guest stint there because the networks didn't want to have their stars, popular or popularizing another show. Did your association with this show help you either because of A, the show itself, or B, NBC? That is, in '85 or '86, did you get a role because people at NBC were familiar with your work from Hot Hero?
Unfortunately, no.
No.
That did not happen. I mean, in the 80s, roles for African American actors, females in particular, they weren't that many, right?
Yeah.
They weren't forthcoming. There was not an abundance of those roles. So I just went out with everybody else to auditions for movies, for soap operas. I did recurring roles on a few soap operas, on All My Children.
Oh,
Um,
really?
uh, yeah,
What
yeah.
what 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 year were you on All My Children? Because I used to watch All My Children.
Oh my goodness, I was on All My Children. I want to say the early 90s, I played the role of Vivian Roxbury Bonds. She was a sort of a socialite mother of oh, what was my daughter's name? It was one of those triangle stories. I can't recall
Was
who
was
my
was it,
daughter.
was it the girl Angie? No, she was played by Angie and Jesse, with like the first black super couple on. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, no, no. It was after Angie and
Oh,
Jesse.
okay.
Yeah, definitely after Angie and Jesse. It was another African American couple,
Okay.
and I played her mother. I was sort of this
Yeah.
kind of highfalutin, socialite. It was fun. I
Yeah.
just remember her name was Vivian Roxbury Bonds.
Yeah.
And, so I did that. I also was on it wasn't Guiding Light. It was As the World Turns.
Mm.
I played oh my goodness, the sister of one of the leads, Tamara Tooney. Tamara Tooney's sister, I think, was this character.
Mhm.
But that again, that was a recurring role. And so yeah, and then of course the episodic
Mm.
stuff, the Law and Orders. I was on Law and Order like 3 or 4 times. I was actually on the very first season of Law and Order with Chris Noth, and met Chris before the show even aired. And really nice guy, very supportive, very sweet, I remember. And it was that very first season. And
Mm.
then in subsequent seasons, I played different roles, to the point where they just actually called me one day and said, we need someone who can come and cry and
Mm.
be like a really good crying mother. So I was like, okay, I can do that.
Well,
um,
we'll get more into those kind of roles when we do the show
oh,
about your
sure.
acting later. So let's just wrap up then about Hot Hero Sandwich. You clearly have some fond memories of it. Uh, are there any anecdote that we might have missed? And if not, any final thoughts? So, do you have any other anecdote you could give, and then a final thought?
Yeah, only that the fact that everybody was so excited that we were using the same dressing rooms as, John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, and I don't know who had, oh my goodness, who are the other actors on Hot Heroes? I mean, on Saturday Night Live
Well, you
back.
had Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Lorraine Newman, Jane Curtin.
The other one, like,
Oh, yeah, Gilda Radner.
Yeah, Gilda Radner. And everybody was like, "Oh, you got Gilda Radner's dressing room. I wish I had that dressing room." But we were just so excited to be, walking the hallowed grounds of Saturday Night Live, and using, the studio and the stage. And it was just really an exciting time, to be involved in something like that. And the crew, I remember the crew was really nice. And I'd actually worked with some of that crew in some later shows that I did, as well at NBC. So yeah, just really fun memories. And also I have been in touch with like Frankie Faison.
Mm.
I run into him on occasion. Frankie has been in some work that I've done. Sandra McLean. We're all actually kind of temporary contemporaries, even though he played my father back then. So yeah, those people I still see, throughout the years. I would run into on occasion. It was always good to see them.
Well, I'm going to link to some links for Hot Hero below here, and we'll come back in a little bit and do a second show talking about your general acting career. So I want to thank you, Nan-Lynn, for talking about Hot Hero Sandwich.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it.